Are you struggling with your mobile service and you don't really know how to make a profit? Let me show you why the math is hard and why front-end software is key to making your profit. So how do you figure out labor rate? Let's do the math and explain to you exactly how you should figure it out and make sure you're making a profit. So the first thing you need to understand is with the labor rate, you need to know every expense that you have. How much does it cost you to run that company? Payroll, software, insurance, debt payments, rent payment, it doesn't matter. Whatever it is, you need to add it up and be precise, okay? So for me, it's pretty high. It's $160,800 for the year. It's right here. That's a huge number. But I pay ourselves a salary, right? So if we have 52 weeks in a year and we times that by 40 hours, that's 2,080 hours in a year. So we're gonna take that 2,080, we're gonna divide it into this. That comes out to about $77 per hour, okay? So $77 an hour. That is your base minimum, what I need to charge in order just to pay these bills. Well, we need to make a profit, right? That's the whole point of being in business. So right now, in order to meet mine, you need to add about 50 to 60% on top of that. So if I add plus 50% to this, I'm gonna come out to about $115 per labor rate hour. And that's exactly what I charge right now. The 50 is a little on the low side if you ask me. Some people will say 20, 30, 40. I believe in 50 or 60%. We're in the business to make money, so charge your worth, right? This number used to be lower for me, so my 60% that I used to add on to this was only $98, and I was still charging $115. I made sure I built a company around those numbers because I knew my wife was gonna be here at some point, and we wanted to make sure that this labor rate per hour was intact. It's pretty simple math. It's not hard to figure out your labor rate, and you should adjust from there. Leave some extra room, make sure you're making that good profit. So why do I think you should be running a front-end software? This is the reason. These numbers down here are my actual parts matrix. This is what we use when we sell parts. So I hope you can read it. There might be a glare, but this is how it works. So if a part cost me $0 to $2, so this would be a penny to $2, we would multiply it by 3.75, and it gives us a 73% gross profit margin on the part. Anywhere from $2 to $5, it's a multiplier of 3.5, and that's a 71% margin. We've got $5 to $10, that would be a 2.7 multiplier, 63% margin. $10 to $50 would be 2.4 multiplier, 56% margin, and so on, right? Now, if you're doing all this on paper, it's gonna take you forever. But I will show you the math in case you need to do it, because I get it. TechMetric, Mitchell One, all those softwares, ShopMonkey, all that stuff, they're very expensive. I understand, but I am gonna tell you that the math we're about to go through, if you have to do this on every single ticket, it's gonna take you forever. And you're gonna be missing out on money if you aren't doing this. This is why I say you need a front-end software. All right, so how do you find the margin with your labor and your parts to get your overall gross profit margin on a ticket? Because what do we keep telling you? Your gross profit margin on a typical ticket should be somewhere between 50 and 60%. That means your labor should be somewhere around 70 to 73%, and your parts should be somewhere around the 50% margin, 40 to 50, depending on how expensive the part is. That way, when the total ticket is put together, you're gonna sit somewhere in the 50 to 60% gross profit range. By doing that 50 to 60% on the ticket is used to pay all of the expenses for the company that we just talked about in our labor rate. So let's break it down. And here's another key factor in this. When we're talking about labor, because that's the first thing we're gonna talk about, is you need to know your loaded cost. So for me, we'll use me as an example, I pay myself $50,000 a year. That's not what the company has to pay. The company has to pay more than that. All right, so if I pay myself $50,000 a year, bad handwriting, I know. That's $961 a week. That's my actual pay. Now, I have to pay a total of $149 of that in taxes. That's your typical income tax, Social Security, and Medicare. Now, the company, me as the company, has to pay tax on that. So we have to add that into what we call a loaded cost, right? And technically, I still pay myself 2 weeks out of the year, which is vacation. That's why I base this on 52 weeks, not 50 weeks, and then add in more on the cost of that. So with a company, you have to pay FUTA, you have to pay a portion of Social Security, a portion of Medicare, and the Florida SUI thing. That's a total of $73 a week. So the company has to pay this. You have to know your numbers. That's what I mean by a loaded cost, right? So let's say you're paying yourself just $20 an hour. Well, it doesn't cost the company that. It's going to cost the company more than that. And you're going to have to figure out that number for yourself. But usually at about 20%. That's a good rule of thumb to get started, to know that, hey, it's going to cost me more than this to run the company, okay? So what that really works out to is I get paid $961, but the company has to pay out $1,033 every single week in order to pay me and pay the taxes that the company owns. So that's my total weekly loaded cost of running the company as myself. My wife has the same exact thing because she's the front end staff. So make sure you figure out your loaded numbers. So in my front end software, I have that listed as approximately $32 an hour as a technician. That's a good area for me to be when I break down my numbers even deeper than what we're going to go through here. So let's look at a basic ticket. Let's say the ticket has 2.1 hours in sold labor, okay? That sold labor comes out to $241.50. That's the labor for the ticket. So what's our margin on that? Well, we have to take this number, 241.50, and we need to minus off our cost. So what's our cost? That $32 times 2.1, which in this case is $67.20. Okay? That leaves us with $174.30 in profit on the labor for this job. Now what we do is we take this number and divide it by the 241. That brings us to a 72% profit margin on the labor. So now if you're not running software, you need to do this math every single time for your labor. Not really. You just have to know that this is approximately where you're going to sit on the labor side. So let's not forget about that. Remember it later. So now how do we do the parts? The same exact way. I'm going to use this ticket I have open here as a for instance. This is on, I think it's a Tundra. This is the one where the starter is under the intake. So that's the 2.1 hours. Now we've got a starter and we've got intake gaskets. Now this isn't a real ticket I sold a customer. This is just something that I threw together, and I didn't even I didn't adjust my margins to where I would for a customer. It's just a bullshit ticket. So just keep that in mind before you all jump my case. So we have a starter at $399.98, and we've got our manifold gasket set at $64.98. Okay? That's what you would sell it to the customer for. Now we have a cost of $239.69, and we have a $34.66. That puts us at $464.86, and it cost us $274.35. Okay? So now what do? We minus that off, and that brings us down to $190.51. So now we're going to do what? We're going to take this profit and divide it by this number right here. I got to use the calculator. So we're going to do 190.51 and divide it by 464.86. And that comes out to a 40.98, or actually what you're supposed to do is now times that by 100, okay? So we would divide 190 by, right here, that, and that comes out to 0.4098, and then you times it by 100 to get 40.98. It's a 41% margin on the parts. Great. So we've got a 41 on the parts and 72 on the labor. Now we need to work that together to make sure our ticket is where it needs to be. Now how we do the math on that? What you actually have to do is break apart this. We had 2 parts on there, right? So if we were to do the math we just did and broke that down into 2 separate categories, we would have these numbers. We'd have the 72 in the labor, but in order to get down to the 41, we'd be at a 40% margin on the starter and a 47% margin on the gaskets. So we need to add all 3 of these up and then divide it by 3. And that brings us down to about a 53% gross profit margin on this made-up ticket that we came up with here. Because if we add these up, we're about 159.2. When we add that up, divided by 3, brings us down to 53%. Do you want to do that math every single time you come up with a ticket? Now, you don't have to. You could willy-nilly this all day long and never make a profit, because there's a lot of people that are out there doing that. They say, oh, I just take the amount that it says online and I do this and I make money. Cool, you're making money. That's awesome. You probably are. But you're not making real money. You're not taking your company to the next level. What you have is you own your job. That's it. You own your job. You own your paycheck. You don't have room to invest for your future. You don't, like, right now, I am cash flowing my daughter's wedding. Cash flowing my daughter's wedding. I never imagined that I'd be able to do that. Now, it's a way off. It's over a year and a half away. But I'm able to do that because we do this. And my wife just left her job and came home. And now we pay freaking health insurance, which was in that $168,800 that I was showing you before. That used to not be there either. But I built this company from the ground up, making sure that these numbers were perfect, every single ticket. That's why we use front-end software, to be able to do that. You know what else I'll cash flow as we move forward? A new roof on my house. And we're paying off debt. So this might look like an outrageous number, that $160,000, and it is, but we do over $200,000 in revenue every year. So if you want to be at that level and you want to get there, whether it's a shop or you're mobile, these are where the numbers need to be. I don't care what anybody else says or what anyone else is telling you. If you don't have the software, you need to learn the math that we just did here on this whiteboard. I'm telling you right now, if you don't, you're leaving a ton of money on the table. So this matrix here, save it, screenshot that. You can even Google and get a very minimal version of this. And don't take this to heart. When you do the math that we just did, and we bring that ticket together, if your ticket's at 75%, you better lower it. Lower that down. You don't need to be charging an astronomical amount. That's where most of these people that are online that want to talk crap about us is because they don't believe these numbers. They think that it doesn't cost any money to run a service like this. Even the brick and mortar, they think that it doesn't cost money. And that's fine. Those are not the people for you with you starting out your service. But I'm telling you, if you're starting out, you better learn the math that we just went over because it's going to be a game changer for you.